Permit me to begin by stating that I am a typical person. When I say this, I mean that I come from a normal, intellectual family, and that from a young age, I was instilled with the belief that love and trust are the cornerstones of every healthy relationship. Also, nature did not hinder my look in any way, and as a result, I have a sporty figure. I sustained this physique by murdering it under the weights in the gym. My masculine ego was unavoidably bolstered as a result of the fact that the female sex was always sympathetic to me. Having said that, the morals and ethics of my family, which were strongly instilled in me from a young age, did not let me to live an unrestrained masculine lifestyle. Despite the fact that I had a lot of female admirers, I always believed that woman you love should be your role model. Your mother is the only other person who can compare to the purity and brightness of your temple, and although it doesn't really have anything to do with my narrative, I will tell you that I have been interested in aviation ever since I was a kid, and that the sky and aircraft are my most favorite things in the world. This is a component of who I am. Because of this, I enrolled in the higher civil aviation school. After graduating from that school and navigating my way through a maze of different committees, tests, and training centers for flight crews, I was finally awarded my pilot's license and proudly took the right seat in the cockpit of a Boeing 737 as a co-pilot trainee for a major airline. I then began to hone my skills of taming the steel bird in the sky while accumulating experience and flight hours. Another significant character in my narrative is a good buddy of mine named John. To me, he was like an older brother. We had known one another since we were little children. Even before we entered high school, he was a man who had stood the test of time, and with whom I had been involved in a variety of tales and all manner of difficulties. Hence, I made it a point to ensure that he would never betray or defraud anybody. We were always there for each other, and we helped each other out in a variety of different situations. When it comes to individuals like that, they claim that with him, whether in the heat of combat or on a reconnaissance mission, or whatever it is that they assert, but John did have one major flaw in his character. He was just not a good person to be around women. It has always been easier for him to establish common ground with women and to acquire what he wants from them because to the great charm and tongue-in-cheek humor that nature bestowed upon him. He was always skilled at manipulating women in the manner that he desired. Because he possessed all of these skills, he was also able to advance his career at one of the most important trading companies. His one and only conviction was that a woman is another woman who is yearning for a man, and that in order to have a successful relationship with a woman, all you need to do is be able to read her, locate her hidden buttons and levers, and then use your power to manipulate them. And any stunning lady, whether she a fresh-faced college student or a seasoned executive, will be vying for a spot in your bed. In addition to being a psychologist, he was a narcissist. I'm sorry to say it, but he really did have a talent for convincing people. It would appear that this was the reason for the meteoric rise of his career. And so were the airplanes that carried me into the clouds. The reason he did not try to get married was because he believed that a woman should not be revered if a guy did not want to go through the pain of being in love with her. This was the topic of our ongoing disagreements. He had a negative outlook on women in general and said that there was not a single woman alive today with whom he could share his life and make it meaningful. I challenged his assertion and pointed out that he simply had not loved anyone genuinely up to that point. All he said in response was, "Dude, get down to earth already. There are no perfect women." This may seem metaphorical, but in reality, I was in heaven while he was on earth. It was just coincidental that at various points in time, but John and I both found ourselves in the same crimp city in the end. At the time, he was serving as the commercial director for a big corporation in the same city in which I was employed by an airline that had a base at a certain airport. I was relieved that life did not force us to become apart from one another, and even when we were there, we kept up our normal conversation. Now, about the girl on dating. Rihanna is her given name. It was fate that brought us both to the restaurant where we first met. One of our gals, who works as a flight attendant, had her birthday today, and we all got together to celebrate. She was a close friend of one of her family, which was a happy coincidence. We were all seated at the same table, so we were going to be in close proximity to one another. She had a natural blonde hair color, velvety skin, and a lovely, elegant walk to go along with her stunning good looks. I had the impression that I would never be able to forgive myself if I did not make an effort to become more familiar with her. I decided to take a risk and as the slow music started playing, I asked her to dance with me. She said yes. The fact that I had only recently returned from another trip contributed to the trust that others had in me. Specifically, the flying outfit that I was wearing at the time. She retorted in a flirtatious manner, "How can you say no to a man in uniform?" While we gently walked to the beat of the music and spoke, she continued to flirt with me. We discussed my career as a pilot in detail. She questioned me with a keen curiosity about the techniques used in the airplane kitchen. It was very clear that she found my company to be very enjoyable. She informed me about herself, including the fact that she worked as a translator of foreign languages, and that she and her sister had been sharing a rental flat for the last 4 years. By the time the night was through, I got the impression that I had known her for a very long time. When you are really close to someone, and you discover that you are both on the same wavelength, there is a sensation that can only be described as, "She is my ideal." I already have something within me, something really powerful that lay dormant within me. It was quite difficult for me to let go of her and say goodbye. When it was finally time for us to leave, I asked her in a very pushy manner whether she would like me to walk her home. After she gave her assent, we hurriedly made our way to the nearest subway station, crammed ourselves onto one of the departing train's final cars, and dashed in the direction of the city's southwest. We carried on our conversation all the way there, and the more we talked, the more intriguing I found her to be. The question of whether or not she was married, and whether or not she had a partner was, of course, one that I had to answer for myself eventually. She shared with me that it had been a few months after the termination of her most recent relationship, and that she had just lately emerged from the sadness that accompanied the loss of the relationship. This fact, for some reason, drew my attention to her earnestness, making me wonder whether she was worried about it. We climbed the stairs to her level. As we were leaving, I grasped her hand and told her that I would want to see her again, and that I had a good time throughout the evening. She stated that she believed in my concept 100%, and we each gave each other our phone numbers. It was becoming late, and the metro was out of service, so she was concerned about how I would get home. I couldn't help but bring this out to her, and I told her that I would call a cab. She was concerned about both of these things. I had another flight the next day, so I had to get going. I gave her a call and extended an invitation to join me at the restaurant when I got back to the city. She responded with a positive answer, and I proceeded to make reservations for the day that I would be flying back to the other city. We kept in touch via text message. On the way back tonight, we would be reunited, and I couldn't wait to see her again. My thoughts kept going back to her constantly. In the evening, we got back together in a restaurant where we had dinner together and continued our time together. I felt like a young kid who had developed feelings for a fellow student in his class. After that, we made it a point to see each other nearly every day, or at least as frequently as my traveling schedule would permit. She came to visit me quite frequently, which made my sister anxious since she was concerned about how she was doing. I showed her my appreciation with presents and flowers, and I even pinned some songs for her on my guitar. There was no cap on how much creativity might be generated. My friend John and I didn't always have the same work schedules, so we got to see each other in a new light. It was either because I was away on a trip, or because he was out on business. I was overjoyed to be able to tell him about meeting an incredible girl, and I did so over the phone. I did not know how I would have survived without her. I waved him off, saying, "With your approach, you will never find good girls." Everything went on as it was. I invited Rihanna to live with me in the apartment that I rented the airline. She agreed to live with me on the condition that I would get to know her sister, and she would make sure she let her go into good hands. One day, I was able to meet John. He wanted to share the joy of going to LA with me. I told him that I would never find good girls with. The period of the relationship gradually went from its tumultuous phase to a more measured and quiet one. I would go off on flights, and on each day to my job. At times, I wasn't home for days at a time, and when our weekends coincided, we spent time together, doing household chores, going to the supermarket to shop, and riding our bikes. We gradually stuck to each other. At times, when possible, I would spike with John. He was in the United States. I was in a "come on, let's not waste any time, and I'll put you in touch with Rihanna, and you'll get a glimpse of what it's like to be a woman." Abos calmed himself down and added, "There's no such thing." In any case, the previous half-year raced past for him in this manner. The management of the airline made the decision to promote me to the post of co-pilot on tourist flights due to the fact that I already had experience flying and was in the training program. I was glad, and Rihanna shared my joy in the accomplishment. By the way, this adjustment guaranteed a raise in compensation, notwithstanding the extra time spent away from family and friends. I finally got to the point where I could tell Rihanna that tomorrow I have a flight with the flight committee and the inspecting instructors. After that, I should be approved as a co-pilot. A week earlier, Jonah had contacted me and urged me in a happy voice to wait for me in the nation where I was born. Simultaneously, with the purpose of introducing him to my queen, I was able to get out on my flight after acing all of the examinations that were given to me. After that, I felt a sense of accomplishment whenever I saw my new job listed in my paperwork without the phrase trainee. John got in touch with me while I was gone. When I got home, we came to an agreement that the three of us would go out, sit in the center, and listen to stories about the United States as a way to celebrate my promotion. However, by the time I got there, the weather had a lot of room for improvement. Our plans to meet up at a cafe outside were foiled by the heavy rain that fell throughout the day. Therefore, we agreed to get together in the house that Rihanna and I share. I drove to one of the metro stations and picked up John there, while I was driving away from the airport in the automobile. During the ride, he told me, "I won't talk about America for now. The evening is still to come. But I'll tell you how I fucked a girl like that the other day." He was referring to the fact that the nighttime had not yet arrived. I know you won't believe it, but I laughed once more. "Wow, when can you do that?" Others exclaimed, but he didn't slow down since he was eager for his next success. John continued by describing in poetry and color how he'd gotten off with another beauty by saying that he was a poet. By the way, she had a boyfriend, he said. Only he was away somewhere on a business trip. So the girl went off the rails. But she did such things. I'll tell you, he probably doesn't satisfy her at all. She's off the chain. Got her number. I'll have to do it again. I must admit, honestly, that it was unpleasant to hear it. And I was mentally sympathizing in absentia with the guy that this girl had. Rihanna came out into the hallway to greet us upon hearing the rustling in the hallway. "Hello," she pronounced. At that moment, John, kicking off his boots, said, "Good evening." And when he looked up at her, he changed his face in an instant. By the way, Rihanna also had a very strange reaction to John, as though she was surprised, not understanding that reaction. I then proceeded to introduce them and called Rihanna my girlfriend. And what I thought, when John suddenly complained of a sharp deterioration in his well-being and said he had to leave immediately, I became increasingly confused and didn't understand anything. I offered to call him an ambulance on the spot, but he flatly refused and said he'd rather go home. Rihanna, who had been asked a lot about John in the past, was quiet in the moment and didn't ask any questions, even though that kind of behavior wasn't her style. John was batting his eyes at, and then she said that she was very tired and dizzy. I ended up going to bed in total confusion and irritation. Rihanna insisted that she needed to do the dishes and unwind. I fell asleep and didn't wait for Rihanna to help with the dishes. The following day, I had the day off as promised. John called and offered to meet me. His voice was very agitated. I was determined to keep talking though. In any case, I have no choice but to inform you about it. If you don't want to know me after that, I understand. I stiffened. Speak up. He continued. Remember on the way home yesterday, I was telling you about a girl I was having fun with the other day. At this point, I begin to intuitively know what he's talking about. I felt something taut inside of me and about to rip. If I had been standing at this point, my legs would have just started to tighten. I was getting ready to hear the worst, although my icon, my temple, and my wife desecrated, and by my own best friend. At first, I sat there in a daze, and then, as I began to come back to reality, my typical condition reflex kicked in, as it often does. "I'm sorry, but I didn't know she was your girlfriend at the time." It slipped out. I couldn't believe it. My icon, my temple, and my wife desecrated, and by my own best friend. When this occurred, I gave John a hard slap to the face with both hands. Immediately after I did so, I heard screams coming from the people sitting at the nearby tables, and then a couple of guys came rushing up sharply. The security guard grabbed hold of us and started dragging us in different directions, gradually pushing us toward the exit. John, rubbing his ears and making a long face, yelled, "That's it." We gently sat back down. But the security guard for the cafe and the men at the tables around us would not move away from us out of fear of more conflicts. In an effort to somehow defuse the situation, I stated that we had already reached a point where we were able to cool down. They reluctantly walked away from us, and we were still the object of the entire cafe's attention, until, as time passed, everyone gradually went back to their business. I sat there and hated everyone and everything around me. Rihanna, John, my job, which I really just idolized. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. John said, "Well, I was basically ready for that." He was slowly starting to get a black eye, and I was in complete prostration. My world had collapsed. I thought at that moment that I had lost the woman I loved and my best friend in one day. John kept repeating that he didn't know who she was. He kept saying words of forgiveness. I was depressed. I sat and listened to him and felt like I was drunk. Then we went outside. I didn't say anything. He offered to take a cab to take me home. I refused, but he came with me anyway. I looked out the window while we were in the cab, and I didn't care. Rihanna was in the kitchen drinking tea. The TV in the kitchen was off, despite the fact that he always came on when he was there. Obviously, she was getting ready too. For my luck, she realized that I already knew. All I felt was pain, burning my soul. The awareness of betrayal, like there was a knife sticking out of my back. Finally, I told him not to call or get in touch with me. If anything, I would call him myself. He said okay and left. It was almost as if he had me in a trance. I felt sick to my stomach and instantly recalled from the center the phrases about women's levers and buttons. It turned out that he had located them. "Please forgive me." Rihanna sobbed and kept repeating, "I'm sorry, I love you." Only now it sounded so nasty out of her mouth, so insincere, like a burp. I asked her to stop saying those words. How did he spend his time with her? She said, "It's just that you're away from home for so long you're on trips. It's okay. It's as simple as that. I'm just away for so long." And she gave herself to the one who was competently hitting on her. We talked for a long time that night. I kept trying to understand the true mechanism of her infidelity, the reasons behind it, and I still could not justify what she had done. There was a flight in the morning. I left the house in silence, not even saying goodbye to Rihanna. She tried her best to woo me, made me coffee and breakfast, but I didn't feel like anything. There was a flight in the morning. I collapsed on my bed and passed out. There was a flight in the morning. I did not summarize the results of our conversation that evening, which slowly turned into night. I was emotionally exhausted and fell into a deep sleep. She went back to her sister's house, even though she cried and tried to talk for a long time. I was never able to forgive her, even though my heart demanded forgiveness. However, I decided that I would survive this breakup and preserve my dignity and respect for myself. I am accustomed from my flying work to rely on a cold mind and common sense calculation. Moreover, she was not going to admit it, and he did not know who Rihanna's girlfriend was, despite the fact that felt guilty about it for a long time. What about me? Now I frequently return home after flights to young flight attendants. I began to take advantage of what nature had given me and enjoy the pleasure of interacting with different women. I began to get what I did not get in my youth, breaking, so to speak, the patterns of pure, sincere love. Now I do not know what should be a woman with whom I trace my life. The next story is even more interesting. It tells how the wife succumbed to the influence of her husband's best friend and cheated with him. After that, the husband found out and decided to take revenge. Watch to the end. A graduation celebration was the setting for Elisa and Sebastian's first sexual encounter, a time when she and Simon had just recently begun dating. Because Simon had much too much alcohol earlier in the evening, he fell asleep in one of the rooms just a few hours after the party had begun. He slept soundly throughout the night, and it was around that time that his closest buddy and his girlfriend were overtaken by a sudden desire for one another. After what they had done, they both became aware of what they had done and made a pact not to recall it in the future and to conceal it, particularly from Simon. That's exactly what the girl did too. She tried to wipe that night from her life and memory, but Sebastian was a lot better at doing so than she was. He persisted in attempting to entice her by reminding her of it again and over. But Elisa remained unmoved, and she persistently pointed out to the poor lover that Simon was truly only his buddy. After he had finished his service in the army and had remained there for a number of additional years under contract, he finally succeeded in convincing Elisa to go through with the experience again one day, which was quite a few years after they had first met. The young woman heaved a sigh of relief and prayed that Sebastian would find happiness elsewhere and never reappear in her or Simon's lives again. After waiting another year, the two young people decided to take the plunge and be married. Shortly after the ceremony, Elisa presented her new husband with a test that had two vivid pink stripes. After another 9 months had passed, Simon was cuddling a beautiful baby girl who resembled him in every way. The man insisted again and over that his closest companion had not been present for any of the significant moments in his life. Sebastian was unable to escape the ceremony for the wedding, and as a result, he was unable to attend the birth of his friend's daughter. Even though they continued to communicate with one another through phone conversations and messages, Simon felt as like he was losing out on the face-to-face engagement. It was as if Sebastian had never been absent from their lives. One day, he just showed up on their doorstep and informed them that his military commitment was finished and that he was now back in town. Elisa was shocked and upset by the information whilst Simon was pleased. The fact that Sebastian had grown up while he was serving only contributed to his irritation. During that time, he had lost weight and his physique had become more toned, and he could see signs of relief in the contour of his body that was apparent under his shirt. Unconsciously, she cast a peek in the direction of her ex-lover as he removed his coat. Even if he didn't show it, Sebastian realized that she was looking at him. Now, she was much more concerned that her friend had accidentally let slip to her husband the details of their affair than she had been before. The woman was unable to get any rest when her husband was away at a party with him and his colleagues because she worried that anything would go wrong while he was away. She was anxious since it is a well-known fact that what a person thinks about while they are sober will eventually come out of their mouth when they are intoxicated. And it looked like Sebastian was trying his best to make up for lost time. He continued to hover about Simon and Elisa's house, urging Simon to sit down and chat to him on a regular basis, while also attempting to assist his ex-mistress in caring for the kid. In point of fact, Elisa didn't trust herself in this predicament the most of all. Even though she was aware that she had cheated on her husband twice with this man for a specific purpose, she continued to feel drawn to him, despite the fact that she vehemently rejected that this was the case inside herself. Since he had returned, the woman's previous boyfriend had been a recurring theme in her nighttime dreams, and it was getting to the point where it was driving her insane. When Simon observed his wife, he found that she had grown tight and apprehensive. Elisa was growing irritated with her kid, even though she was still quite little, and was taking it out on her husband over the smallest of infractions. The guy believed that the whole thing was due to the fact that his outgoing and social wife had been exhausted during her maternity leave as a result of the strain of day-to-day living on it. After a long day at work, he did everything he could to help his beloved relax by distracting her and their daughter with activities like going for a walk or paying a visit to his parents. But none of this has been of any use thus far. All of her husband's wonderful actions made Elisa feel worse. She was angry with herself for ever considering the possibility of another man. For all, the guy she married was such a wonderful human being. He looked for the family as well as her. Sebastian sexually assaulted his friend's wife on several occasions while his buddy was not looking. He also attempted to kiss and touch his previous mistress while she was trapped in a corner by Sebastian. Up to this point, the lady had been able to effectively tear herself away from his grasping hands, but every fiber of her being shouted and pled for her to give Sebastian the opportunity to continue. She yelled in his ear, "Stop it," as she struggled to remove his hands from her hips. "Have you even a little bit lost your mind? Because I care so much for you, yes?" He gave her a grin in return. "I will disclose everything to my spouse requesting that you desist. And I that we have completed this task several times," said Sebastian, "who you think you would have faith in your opinion." Elisa was aware of the futility of disputing in this particular circumstance. She had no idea what to anticipate from Sebastian in that regard. After all, he truly does have the potential to destroy her marriage. A brief conversation between the wife and her husband. On Simon's 30th birthday, they had a passionate encounter. He was unable to drink, just as he was when he was a student, And once again, after a few hours of celebrating, he went to sleep and experienced his ninth dream. It was on this day that Elisa was set free. She hired a home in the countryside, where she hosted a party for her husband and a large group of their friends. Elisa set a nice table. Because there were so many people, the table was too small to accommodate everyone who wanted to sit there. It was a lively and enjoyable event, but Simon had too much alcohol due to his happiness. As soon as Elisa exited the room in which she had just tucked her husband into bed, Sebastian was there to greet her. He didn't waste a single second. The woman relaxed her guard and let her guard down. She consumed an excessive amount of alcohol, which led to a mental state in which she was easily persuaded to give herself up to her ex-lover. The following morning, she saw Sebastian smoking outside on the porch. Elisa retaliated violently when he attempted to stop her by grabbing her arms, but he was unsuccessful. Once more, she held herself responsible for what she had done, as well as her lack of strong willpower. The man snapped back fiercely. Yes, stop. You are doing just fine. Let go. Everything was done in error. Please allow me to forget about it. She sent a pitiful glance in his direction as she stared at him. Why do you not give in? You thought highly of everything. He laughed as he thought about how poor Simon was in the bedroom. Elisa gave it one more pull, and she was eventually successful in releasing her hand. But the moment that both of them turned around, they spotted Simon standing in the entranceway of the room. From the look on his face alone, it was instantly apparent that he had heard everything, and of course, comprehended everything. The man was so enraged that he couldn't tell who it was anymore. With a drawn-out cry, he hurled his fists at his buddy and tossed him into the snow. The man's friend was left lying in the snow. After that, a battle broke out, which Sebastian, with his proficiency in hand-to-hand combat, was clearly winning. Simon was so overcome with rage that he acted rashly and hit without thinking. The guys were able to pull them apart, despite the fact that the combatants continued to yell insults at each other and struggled to get away from the men who were trying to help them. The move has already been made to Simon's wife. Elisa felt her chest tighten as she looked at the angry tears in her boyfriend's eyes.